and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclosure Vic homes at the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bunch of great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Welcome to UCY.TV. Tonight, live, voice of things from history, culture, and language. From the czars and their fall to power to the creation of the Soviet Union and beyond. The control behind the positions of power. The apparent opposition of to the New World Order and Zionism under Putin in the new Russia and rise to power. As well, we'll examine the resurgence of Christianity in Russia and we'll contrast modern American culture. Welcome, y'all. Hello, Chris. I hand you the mic, brother.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. We're live. This is the one and only Chris Shea here, and we're going to have a pretty good show tonight. I think I might have one I actually used to co-host with. If people have been on this show, been listening for a long time, they'll remember them. I used to was my first co-host that I had all the way back at NW Truth Radio. I know it's been a while. It was over 2 years ago, and it's hard to believe that I've been in radio this long, and I'm starting to talk about stuff that it seems like wasn't that long ago. And it's like, oh wait, that was over 2 years ago. When I started radio. Now it's been almost 2.5. It's been close to 2.5 years now. And now look at where we are now. We're going to talk about Russia today. We're going to talk about Putin. We're going to talk about the creation of the Soviet Union, who's really behind the creation of the Soviet Union. Talk about the czars and how they fell from power. And, so today we got quite a bit to talk about, and this is a lot of topics. We talk about Russian history. I mean, it's a very long history going back to year 880, or it goes back to year 882, and Russia today has became, there's all this demonization on the media. A lot of people are thinking that Putin is neo-Soviet. Is people aren't even trying to paint him on the media that he's pretty much bent on world domination or something, which is it's ridiculous. All these accusations towards Putin, and the New World Order really has it out for Putin, is what I've seen, my own personal observations. Putin, he has been in power now for about, Putin is how they actually pronounce it in Russian. That's the correct pronunciation. And it seems like I've used the wrong the pronunciation many times. One of them, I don't usually say Putin. It's Putin. It's the correct pronunciation. It's a little FY, because if you actually look at the Cyrillic script, which I've actually, one of the things I've undertook lately, it's been one of my recent projects, I guess, and on the side with radio, I've started learning Russian, actually. And now I can actually pronounce stuff correctly, all these Russian cities and Russian names and stuff, because I can actually read the name in Cyrillic script, which I now can read, which when you see the name in Cyrillic script, You see that weird N-looking thing, that's the P, and then you see the Y, and that's the double O, so like an oo sound. It's a Putin. It's how it's pronounced when you actually look at it in acrylics. Putin, I think, a lot of times. That's why trademark pronunciation. I almost would stick to it just because I've just said so long. But yeah, Putin, 15 years has been the leader of Russia, and he's done a lot. I mean, in 06, he kicked out the Rothschilds out of Russia, and then later, he put out an arrest warrant for Soros and the Rothschilds later after the interfering with Russia's affairs in around the year 2014, after when they were trying to, they were putting all this accusation of hate against Putin, which has now been about 2 years since the Crimean crisis. After the neo-Nazis took over, that the United States funded in Ukraine, Russia intervened into the Crimea, and they sent soldiers there to protect their mostly ethnic Russian population. 65% of the Russian, or of the Crimean Peninsula is ethnic Russians. And these neo-Nazis have made many times clear that they hate Slavic people and that they want to kill Russians and Russian speakers or people that are supportive of Putin. They went in there to protect them, and they supported, this 97% of the vote, the Crimeans voted to become part of the Russian Federation. So they were officially annexed within a few weeks of the vote. Then later, it continued and it escalated in East Ukraine. A lot of people, there's also a lot of Russians in the districts of Lugansk and Donetsk, where, it's actually in Donbass, the cities of Lugansk and Donetsk, there's a lot of ethnic Russians. It started what's called the War of Donbass, where now these a lot of ethnic Russians, a lot of just people that are anti-fascist in the eastern Ukraine have rose up against the western Ukrainian military, and now you have an active civil war going on in Ukraine that's continued since. There's been a lot of pretty bad things have happened in that time. I mean, we've had in May in the eastern Ukrainian city of Odessa, we had the Odessa massacre where 40 people were killed. Many burned alive, even pregnant women were burned alive in a building as neo-Nazi thugs connected the West Ukrainian government incited the violence and did the actions. On July 17, 2014, MH17 was shot down out of the sky. At first, it was blamed by the West, and with initial finger pointed by the United States, MH17 was blamed on the Eastern Ukrainian rebels. But the thing is, they don't even have that technology. And ultimately, what happened was the West Ukrainians had what later was all these conclusive investigations. Later, it was concluded that the West Ukrainians had to have shot down the plane, and that was a false flag that were attempting to try to push intervention against the Eastern Ukrainians, and that actually what probably happened was 2 fighter jets probably followed. I mean, there was also eyewitness accounts and stuff like that. And near where the plane was shot down, followed them, the MH17 and shot out of the sky, which was not coincidentally what I believe a Malaysian Airlines flight, which if you look at what's happened with Malaysian politics and what's happened now with their airliners. I mean, we had the one that disappeared just a few months before that, and then we had MH17 happened. I'll tell you that it doesn't seem very possible that a plane could disappear when they can literally with satellite read a newspaper from space. But you're going to tell me that at the same time that they can't find a giant plane, and it's been over 2 years and they still haven't found anything. That happened on March 1st, 2014. In Western Ukraine, is still, right now, we've gone to the point where even their Western Ukrainian citizens have gotten fed up with Poroshenko. Many are calling for them to step down their government. And what brought Poroshenko to power originally was really a coup and a constructed revolution, really, because the Western Ukrainian, there's all these riots and these citizens rose up against Yanukovych, the former prime minister of Ukraine. However, what seems very uncommon is that all these guys were probably funded, or at least the leaders of these riots were funded in Kiev to bring about the Poroshenko government, which originally he wasn't in it, but the government that took over, the right sector of Svoboda, taking over the Ukrainian government. Then later Poroshenko was elected to the Ukrainian presidency and what was probably a very fraudulent election on May 25th, 2014. At the same time, you had these, you have to remember, of course, that this is not the first time that they've had these similar kind of fake revolutions. They tried the same thing in Russia, but they miserably failed in 2011 with the attempted color revolution. They had it before in Ukraine, a color revolution of sorts, and they're constructed by big billionaires and elites from the West, people like Soros, people like, of course, the Rothschilds and stuff. They fund these fake revolutions that appear to be spontaneous, but they're not spontaneous. It's like the Arab Spring, and the bringing about of Mohammed Morsi to power in Egypt is done in a very similar fashion. And there, of course, when you look at it and you actually put the scrutiny, it's very obvious that was what happened in these countries were not spontaneous events. They were constructed for the purpose of foreign policy, of imperialism by the United States, Israel, EU, whatever, Western governments. In Russia, they've handled it very coolly. They've showed a lot of restraint. They have shown a lot of, they've really just shown a very, almost like a chess player's type mindset that they've used to try to, ultimately win in this Ukrainian standoff. They've had to just give humanitarian support and do very minor moves to help the East Ukrainian struggle against West Ukraine to try to receive somewhat of a de facto autonomy in the region. However, they can't do anything drastic like just enter Eastern Ukraine, because that could lead to a War III type scenario, because the United States has paratroopers and mercenaries over there in West Ukraine, and it's all built up on Latvia and all these other countries. This has been a NATO tactic ever since the end of the war. They put tons of soldiers and intentionally to intimidate Russia. And they put all these NATO bases all around Russia. And it's like what actually it wasn't Medvedev who said it, it was Lavrov who said it, that said, sorry that we put our country in the middle of all your military bases. Because that's what it seems. They got a military base in Seoul, a military base all on East Ukraine. They got military bases all on their southern border in the Middle East, which, Middle East and Russia are actually not as far apart as you think. In fact, after the Afghan war, when the Soviets lost, after the Mujahideen had been funded by the U.S. government, after the Soviets lost that war, the soldiers that were fighting in the war in Afghanistan drove home actually back to Russia. They didn't even take a flight home. They drove all the way north back into the Soviet Union, which at that time was the Soviet Union actually. The territory went way farther south near Afghanistan. I think it actually bordered Afghanistan at the time. Now, it's still not that far away. It's the Russian Federation. And there's when we start talking about the Soviet Union and talk about that era of Russian history, of course, a lot of things come to mind, but let's at least go talk about, what's different between the Soviet Union and New Russia today. And I think that's what should be focused on, is the New Russia, this new era of Russian history. And ultimately, I think that Russia became the biggest country to oppose the New World Order, and that's why there's been all these attempts against the Russian government, all the media hatred towards them, and there's even been a CIA, I think a former CIA intelligence member said that the only way to stop Putin is to put a bullet in his head, and that's pretty much was insinuated as the plan the United States government would do, is to eventually. I said, or could try eventually. I don't think they're ever going to actually take out Putin, because Putin's intelligence, the FSB is probably the best intelligence in the world. It's like, when it comes down to intelligence, the FSB is probably, at the same kind of level as the Mossad, but they're not doing this dirty stuff the Mossad does, because I don't think anybody can reach their level of filth that the Mossad does with the false flags and the all these kidnappings and all the other things that they've done throughout the years. And they're everywhere, the Mossad. And you can believe probably FSB and almost the major intelligence agencies are everywhere. They have to, for national security measures slash, on Russia's behalf. And then, of course, Britain, the United States, I mean, the imperialist foreign policy agenda. I think, Russia, you can probably believe there's been some agents that have done some pretty dirty stuff. I think definitely during the KGB days, the KGB was known for some pretty dirty tactics. And the CIA, I mean, it's hard to top them as well, what kind of stuff they've done with coups and assassinations and many other very ugly stuff throughout the years. And that's just ultimately the whole game of espionage is it's all about being slick, and it's all about who's willing to speak lower and who's willing to play dirtier. That's what it seems like. And a lot of times you have people that are double, even triple agents. So it gets very complicated. People that are I guess that the triple agent thing is kind of weird to me because ultimately there is only really two sides of things. It's not like, well, I guess something that could happen would be like, a U.S. agent also working for, at the same time, the Pakistani government and the Indian government at the same time. Something like that, two countries allies that actually don't really like each other, like India and Pakistan are both pro-U.S. or pro-U.S. for the most part. I would say India seems to be now, they're actually about the same level. I mean, but India is definitely more pro-Israeli, and that's what's been very disturbing to watch, is that as they've had this very vigilant anti-Muslim leader that's taken over Modi, that the BRICS plan seems to be falling apart because, Putin, I think, has distanced himself from India after the Modi's rise to power because of his stance on the Middle East, and that Modi has a very similar stance as the United States. And Modi seems to actually, kind of stitch things up with the United States and India. And before, they had kind of somewhat of a fallout, but that's no longer happening as the relations, now they have a lot more common ground. And the BRICS, as I said before, that's one thing they've been very doubtful about is that the actual possibility of it coming together, because I feel that BRICS is pretty weak politically inside. There's a lot of differences in there. And I don't think that BRICS, with China and India in there, I think they have to, I think India is definitely going to go, and I think China has to go as well. Maybe the other three can work together. And now there's a lot of political instability inside of Brazil. And as I've seen a lot of lies on the media, on Facebook, even the alternative media, they're putting a lot of lies. And, just, again, I'm starting to call out some of these alternative medias that are ultimately, they put a lot of the same, when it comes to foreign policy, they have a similar, they talk very similarly like the mainstream media, because they don't know anything about these foreign countries, and then they blab their big mouths, and it ultimately results in a lot of misinformed truthers. And ultimately they're doing a very big disservice to a lot of people by making these huge lies, like what I've seen about the alternative media talking about Venezuela or something, where it's just complete drivel. And in Brazil, seems to be kind of on the similar plan that they've done with Brazil, was just talking about, they've said that Brazil is suffering majorly from their government. They're saying that there's I feel it's thought, this is what happens under socialism, whatever. And then they show these big pictures of these rallies, and then they don't show the counter rallies where there's equal amount of people on the streets in Brazil, or even more. And the problems in Brazil economically is coming from sanctions, just like Venezuela. It's coming from sanctions where they're not, where a lot of countries are not allowed to trade with them. It's coming from economic warfare. They said the same thing about Zimbabwe. They kept saying, no, it's the economic policies of Mugabe. No, it's the sanctions. They were doing fine, and then these sanctions hit, and all of a sudden they weren't doing fine. It doesn't have anything to do with the, because sometimes these countries were doing fine for 20, 30 years under the socialist government or whatever, and then once the sanctions hit, all of a sudden, coincidentally, 6 months later, their economy's doing bad. Yeah, it is bad that these countries oftentimes have to rely on foreign trade. I think that trying to become as sovereign as possible seems to be the only way to survive. as a country, and ultimately, what like Bernie Sanders is preaching or whatever, his type of what he's preaching, pretty much the same thing that these other politicians are saying when it comes to the foreign policy, and people would rather talk about what he's claimed to be, which he's not. It's like with Obama or whatever, is that he's not a socialist, he's a corporate whore, and that's what Sanders will eventually turn into, and he'll end up being another piece of the establishment. He won't be any different from the rest. People that actually think that Sanders will be different from the rest, at least at this point, I've seen absolutely no indication that he's going to be different from the rest, because all I see is rhetoric, but his voting actions, the actions that he's done, and the life that he's lived says much different than when he's talking. He definitely isn't the peace-loving politician or whatever that he claims to be. He claims to be against war, but he voted to fund the Iraq War 4 times. He claims to be against. He claims to be pro-liberty at times, and then he's voted for the Patriot Act, I believe. There are definitely bills similar to that. I'm pretty sure he voted for NATO. And, let's not forget the major anti-liberty thing that he's now turned for, which the thing was he used to actually be pro-gun. At least, he voted against the Brady bill back in the 90s, and now he's saying that he actually wants to pretty much get rid of most guns to cater to the Starbucks liberals of America. The social justice warriors of America that apparently guns and I see all the stuff that these people online are so against all these people, all these things, all these personal liberties that they'll claim to be for personal freedom or whatever, claim to be for pro-choice, but you can't have your own gun for self-defense or to fight back against the government that you claim to be against, and you used to live in some kind of dream world that we could actually take on the government with our guns. We could take them out with our iPads and take them out with our peaceful protests. Definitely a country's government that's been willing to kill 20 million people in wars over the years. 30 million, well, actually, close to 30 million since World War II. But they'll definitely not be violent at your peaceful protest. Peaceful protests only work when you have guns behind and they're afraid to shoot at you because they know that you'll shoot back. That's the only way. I mean, you have armed, may not all of the protesters armed, but you have people armed that are ready to defend the protesters. That's the only way. Militias have to be somewhere in the revolution. You're living in a dream world if you actually can believe that peaceful marches will do anything. It's like look at all these people that have been want true civil rights, black people and other minorities. They've been marching for 50 years, and there hasn't been a lot of results ever since the civil rights movement did. To believe that we've actually reached full equality probably is a bit stretching, because I'm not saying about it. I'm not saying that whites are at the highest privilege. I'm definitely not like Bernie Sanders. He doesn't know you know how to be, or you don't know poverty if you're white. That's the most ridiculous statement ever. But there's definitely some privilege, especially or it's more like there's some disadvantages for like Muslims and stuff like that in this country now. That's it, with all the Islamophobia in this country ever since the media put out the hate campaign against them, scaring people 24/7 of Muslims, while at the same time our economy was on the path to a huge bubble. We weren't talking about that in 06 and 07. We weren't talking about the imminent housing bubble, which ultimately would lead to a big Wall Street crash, leading to pretty much a depression for America's economy. Later, we would have quantitative easing, where the Federal Reserve would put out 4 times the money that we currently there's 4 times more money, 4 times the money that had been currently in stock was printed. So that means now if that stuff goes into circulation, a lot of the laws of that's actually a law of economics that pretty much usually works especially when you're constrained by this economy that we have here in the United States. We will lose us, the people, not the super rich, they still have the same purchasing value because it's all on credit rather than actual money that they have. But us regular people will have to pay 4 times more on everything eventually if that money's put out into circulation. And a lot of it was, and that's why you see major inflation on so many commodities. In Russia, they've actually, one major thing that they've done differently than us in the last, especially ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, is that they back their ruble by natural resources and stuff that actually, it's not backed by speculation with the Federal Reserve dollar. It's by a private bank in the first place. But the only thing that's backed by is that if stuff that's traded, if it's oil is traded in dollars and the dollar has value, and now it's losing, these countries are no longer trading in dollars, so it's losing more and more value. So eventually they're going to have to go to some kind of restructuring of some sort. When you have the ruble that's backed by, I think, like natural gas and fuel, or things that Russia actually owns, actual reserves, actual physical things that Russia has. It's not perfect, and they're about to switch over to a gold system in a little bit. But that's why you don't see Russians suffer from a major economic problems in 2009, 2010, when we were going into a depression here in the United States. Now, they've had some economic problems ever since the sanctions hit in 2014. It has nothing to do with the economy Russia has. It all has to do with the fact that they've been sanctioned and that the Western world stopped trading with them, which unfortunately a lot of their businesses did rely on trade to the West, which they should just try trading with their allies, Iran, Cuba, and these other countries, Venezuela, Bolivia. They had some options, but it's very hard to make a mostly self-sustaining economy, especially when your economy is that large. Russia today has also done one major thing culturally different, which I see, unfortunately, I see this very morally absent generations, coming up here in the United States, and I see just a culture that's losing a lot of morals that we had, and losing just this old American culture is just getting blended out by complete commercialization. It's been completely wiped out. It not only is being completely wiped out by commercialization, it's getting wiped out by it's turning into trendiness. There's nothing that stays. We don't have a fixed culture anymore. It used to be Americana. It used to be an American culture of sorts. Now that's going away, and in Russia, they've put a firm ground on Russian history, Russian culture, and valuing the old monarchy, some stuff from the Soviet Union, the war, the victory over the Nazi Germany in World War II, and also the religious background and the people that they are. And there's been a big resurgence of Christianity ever since the Soviet Union fell. There's been now 75% of the country is now openly practicing Christianity, or at least most of them openly practice Christianity. And in the same time, what I've seen, from my personal experience with Russians, is that Russians they like fun at the same time. They love their culture, and it's not like they're like really traditional or anything. They don't do fun stuff. They'll still drink and party and smoke weed or whatever, but at the same time, they actually have something that they have morals and a culture that they actually stick to. Well, here in America, people changes the culture. The culture changes every 6 months. It seems like new songs that are popular and new people are popular. While in Russia, it kind of who they are doesn't really change now. And they have a lot more pride in their country. I think their leader actually has a lot more pride in Russia, which wasn't really the case in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, it was more pride in the state and more pride in the ideology rather than the nationalism. And really, the Soviet Union was kind of based on loose nationalism between the countries. It wasn't based on it wasn't really based on strong Russian nationalism. Well, there was Soviet nationalism, I guess, but it wasn't quite the same thing as today. And nowadays, you see in Russia, the support for Putin has just went through the roof. After all this, how he's dealt with the Ukrainian crisis and how he's brought back the economy from, it was going bad. He's brought back the economy from the gutter or was heading into the gutter in 2014, but he brought it back from the gutter in 1999 all the way up to a booming economy, and then it started to go down in 2014, and now he's brought it back, and now Russia looks very good when you talk about the next 5 years or whatever. I would say, the big marker will be, I think the economy will be in great shape, and I think ultimately the Ukrainian crisis will come to some kind of solution by the time Putin leaves this term. I don't know if he leaves office in 2018. There's some rumors that Putin's not going to run for re-election in 2018. He'll be 66 years old shortly after the start of his first term, so he might want to retire. He doesn't act 66, and he seems younger. Might stick around for another 6 more years because if he does rerun for election, he is going to win. There's almost no competition, and the only major competition that United Russia has, or whatever party Putin decides to run for, there's rumors that United Russia is kind of on this way out, and they're going to make a popular front Russia. It's going to be called whatever, and there's going to be a little bit more various ideologies in there. It's a signal of Russia going a little bit more, what I think is possibly a signal of Russia going a little bit more to economically to the left than they were before in the 2000s, and now made a little bit change in their policies. And whatever party he runs for, the only competition he really has is the Communist Party, which Russians don't really want that. So some of the older generation, that's where most of their base is. But I'm saying a lot of Russians are more comfortable with just sticking to the new Russia that they've made, and that this new era, rather than try to go back to something that didn't exactly end up well for them. And no matter what you think the reason was, it didn't end up very well. Of course, a lot of the popular opinion inside of Russia is that Gorbachev was a traitor and ultimately just pretty much crashed the country, and that Yeltsin finished the job. There's also inside of Russia, too, that the whole Soviet Union was ultimately just kind of a controlled opposition by the New World Order, and that these people, were pretty much just puppets, Brezhnev and Khrushchev, Brezhnev, all them. I think that opinion's more held by a lot of like the more conservative part of United Russia. Some of them might think that way more, and a lot of people that are supportive of Putin outside of Russia think that way. That Russia was actually kind of conquered for a while. And that's what ultimately happened. It was a conquering of the old Russia and by foreigners at the Bolshevik Revolution. Which there's so many swirling rumors around the Bolshevik Revolution, which happened back in 1917. And you have these and there was foreigners like on both sides, like Leon Brodsky, and Leon Trotsky. Well, actually, Leon Davidovich Brodsky was an actual real birth name. So Leon and Trotsky weren't his real first and last names, and then you have Yosef. And then like Dushavashvili, which is actually later Joseph Stalin. Stalin was actually a nickname given to him, which means man of steel, which actually was around the same time that name was given to him. And then the Superman comics came out later, but Stalin was no Superman. Stalin was like a Lex Luthor, but not Lex Luthor wasn't even that dark and evil. I mean, that. Under his command, yes, the Red Army was able to defeat fascism, but it almost didn't happen. It was almost his fault that Russia fell to Nazi Germany. I remember Stalin, his government signed an agreement with Nazi Germany before the start of the war, and then 2 years later, Operation Barbarossa happened, and the Germans invaded Russia, seeing that they were lulled into a false sense of security, and feeling that they would not be invaded by their supposed, not really an ally, but a country that they made a truce with. So Stalin also he was very willing to command the Russian army himself, or the Soviet army, or the Red Army himself. So many times there was major tactical errors where he just, where there should have been a tactical retreat, but he said just throw in at the problem until it fixes itself. That's pretty much what his idea of warfare was, which is very bad, and it ultimately ended up in anywhere between 27 and 45 million Russians dead at the end of it. There were 16 million Soviet soldiers died, and the amount of civilians, I mean, is estimated anywhere between. It's really hard to actually estimate how many Soviet civilians died in World War II because many might not have died immediately but died later directly caused by the war, or it's hard to tell whether because it happened many years later, whether the injuries that they sustained in the war led to their deaths, 10, 15 years later. But I see estimates that say 45 million and actually 29 million Soviet civilians died. And ever since that, the Russians have been, I think that at least the people of Russia have been wanting peace and never want to see a war like that again because that war was so horrific. Even Putin's parents survived the siege of Leningrad, which now is named St. Petersburg, which was the name for most of the time during the Russian monarchy, and then later it was changed in 1914 to Petrograd, which people wonder why they changed it right before the fall of only just 3 years before they fell out of power. Well, it's actually because World War I started that year, and they felt St. Petersburg sounded too German, so they wanted to name it to something, which I think Petra was somebody in the Russian royal family, so in Petra. So Petrograd later was named Leningrad after erased all indications of the Tsar in 1922, and then later in 1981 when the Soviet Union fell, it was renamed St. Petersburg, which was the historical name of the city. But St. Petersburg and Moscow were both attacked in the war, and Putin's parents actually survived in Leningrad, which the siege, and it was Putin's mom almost didn't make it. The story that Putin told was that his mom was actually thrown into a pile with the dead bodies because they thought she was dead, and then Putin's father went looking for her, and then he found her in the pile of dead bodies and actually nursed her back to health. And then I think later Putin was born in 1952, actually. Yeah, so later they would give birth to Putin in 1952. Now look where he is now. He's now the president of Russia. Has been up in power for the last 15 years. Actually, now we're about to go on 16 years. It's been 16 years, because he was actually sworn in on December 31st, 1999. After Yeltsin, people were so sick of Yeltsin, there was almost about a threat of a new revolution inside of Russia. And then Yeltsin probably passed the torch the first person he could, not realizing that Putin had a much different plan than what Yeltsin's plans have been for the last 5 years or so of Russia, which was pretty much just selling everything off the big oligarchs, which Putin would later jail those oligarchs and give it back to the people, the properties that those oligarchs had acquired ill-gottly during those few years when they had major sell-off of Russian property, all kinds of stuff that used to be state-owned was sold off to major oligarchs, and even Goldman Sachs had a major part in that buy-off of Russia. It was very ugly, and the economy just sputtered and crashed. I mean, it was a complete crash and burn. It was one of the worst economic, and it was one of the worst humanitarian disasters, the whole fall of the Soviet Union in the last 100 years. Because during that time, millions starved, and many of the Russian women whored themselves out. Many of them left. Many Russians left the country, and there was a mass exodus, and a lot of in the former Soviet republics, there was ethnic wars. I mean, it was all out ugly. And also in former Yugoslavia, which is the country that I think a lot of people think is more close to Russia than they think it's more close to Russia than it actually is. Yugoslavia is not really. I've talked about that on the show, but it's Yugoslavia is actually more comparable to a West European country. It's like a Mediterranean country, really. It has a lot more characteristics of a West European country than an East European country. The only thing is that they're Slavic people, and it's the same people that you see throughout Eastern Europe, but their culture is kind of closer to something you see like in France or Germany. And the culture now in Russia, has kind of evolved from the old Soviet culture, but it does have a lot of things left over. But ultimately, Russian culture has never really changed too much. Some of the basic stuff, even during the Soviet Union when Christianity wasn't exactly as praised as it is today, they were still always 75% Christian. the Russian population. I don't think that it really went down too much, the amount of people that practiced. They just didn't practice openly, many of them, for many years, or as openly. And afterwards, they started practicing openly again and really embracing it, putting in as embraced Christian, as it definitely embraces Christianity as it's seen in different holidays. You could throughout the years in Russia. And Putin has had a pretty good relationship with the Patriarch, which, even if you're not religious, I think the Patriarch should be looked upon as a pretty good person, because what he stands for politically is not what the Pope stands for. It's actually pretty opposite, because the Pope stands for the popes over the time has usually stood for the United States policy, Israel's policy, and supported fascist dictators and the Zionist state of Israel and what they wanted to do in the Middle East. And the Patriarch actually was supportive of people like Hugo Chavez and went to Cuba before. I think he actually met Fidel, and he was actually very supportive of Putin, of course. And he spoke out on stuff like the NSA and spoke out on what's been happening in Ukraine by the West Ukrainian neo-Nazis that's happened. And I think that the Patriarch is ultimately on the right side of things when it comes to calling out the New World Order and the New World Order ran countries, unlike the Pope, which even this Pope Francis, he still, is yet to really call out Israel. And Pope Francis also has some pretty shady ties back to the military junta back in 1978 through 82 in Argentina. I believe that he was there. I mean, there's rumors apparently that went around that that he was brought behind kidnapping or saw some people during that time, which wouldn't be too surprising if he was a fascist collaborator, because his predecessor, Pope Benedict, who is still surprisingly alive, was a fascist collaborator as well, was actually a Nazi himself, a Nazi soldier, but he didn't actually go out to fight, but he had been already enlisted and was going to be a paratrooper in 1945 before the war ended, and he was in Nazi use before that, and then went past Nazi use and actually was actually a Nazi soldier. And then later, Pope Benedict, he wasn't even close to his time of being Pope, but he went into the Catholic Church or whatever, and then he worked his way for 60 years until John Paul II died, and then Pope Benedict became the Pope. We've seen over the years it seems like it's a major tool that was used against the Soviet Union and the Pope. Actually, they admitted that the Vatican worked, was the CIA during the Cold War. So it's no surprise that the Vatican, all the way up to, very recently was very strongly in support of these horrible wars in the Middle East and support of these fascists, the leaders around the world. And now Pope Francis, it's a PR message, is what I think, is just trying to bring people back into the Catholic Church after years of people being sick of their lives and being sick of their catering to fascist DC, like they did back when the Catholic Church catered to the Nazis, and now the Catholic Church caters to the United States government. Russia was the major religion is Christianity, but it's not just Christianity; it's the Orthodox Christian. Which you see sometimes in the United States, but they're actually not very common here in the United States. But there's some places where they make up a bigger part of the population. And I think that we allowed the Pope to come to the United States and actually speak at Congress. When we're supposed to have separation of church and state, and we're only going to favor this one guy. We have a lot of Orthodox Christians in this country. Of course, the United States government would never allow them to come, but why don't we allow the Patriarch to come speak to Congress? If we're going to let Francis, might as well allow Patriarch Kirill to speak to Congress. It just would make sense. In Russia, there's also there's still some people that I think that it's left over kind of the sentiments of atheism somewhat, because they were Soviet Union for 70-something years, and state atheism was officially the policy during that time. And now we have this, but it's weird though, because now the people that are succeeded the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, like Gennady Zyuganov, who is the leader of the communists now in Russia, he's actually Christian himself. So that's as far as the culture goes, I guess. It's really completely changed. There's been a resurgence of that, which was, again, was popular before the Soviet Union during old Russia. Now we'll talk about the Tsars. It's weird how the Tsars fell from power for many years, and it was incrementally they lost their power, I guess, and lost the support that they had in the 1800s. They went all the way from the great Tsar Alexander, who was responsible for the Russian victory over France, which I don't know what that ultimately did with history. I mean, I think it might have been a better world if the France could have actually demolished the English Empire instead of the French Empire being crushed. But that's what happened. The Russians, they actually did the scorched earth policy. So when Napoleon's soldiers got to Moscow, there was nothing left. And also another thing that happened during the Napoleonic Wars is that Britain was completely sold out to the Rothschild bankers, because they actually used that. They actually said, well, they put out word on the media that in the newspapers that the British were losing the war, and they actually were winning the war. But the stocks in Britain collapsed, and they bought off Britain for pennies. And then later they were able to, they acquired now something that's worth a lot of money. It was just worth a lot of money. They lost its all value, and now it's worth a lot of money again because they actually won the Napoleonic Wars in the long run. France was lost after over 10-something years of fighting. People forget that in the Napoleonic Wars, how ugly that was. I mean, this was 200 years ago, but ultimately, as many people died in the Napoleonic Wars as died in World War I. And it was over 10 to 15 years of fighting, and it was all throughout Europe. I think it even went into North Africa, maybe went to the Middle East. I don't think it went to the Middle East. It was North Africa and Europe the fighting was. But it was like, a size theater like the European theater was in World War II. And you had major countries like Germany, you had Russia involved, you had France involved, you had Britain involved. You had almost all the same players as in World War II. And Russia, Tsar Alexander, at that time after that war, the Russian monarchy had reached just an all-out level of support. And actually, there's a rumor that Tsar Alexander didn't actually die in 1829, is that he went into exile and became a monk and lived a quiet lifestyle for the rest of his life, which is kind of just an interesting rumor I thought that they have in Russia. And then later, slowly, Nicholas I wasn't really much of a czar. I mean, he wasn't quite as known as Alexander I. And after Nicholas I, and after that was, second, who came after that? Alexander II. Alexander II was the one that actually freed the serfs from slavery. Well, serfdom, which is pretty much slavery. And anyways, I mean, what serfdom is for people that are not familiar, is that pretty much the people are born onto a manor, and if you're not allowed to leave that 20-something-mile area without the owner's permission, and in exchange you get for allowing the lord, which is not like the lord like God, but the owner of the manor, sell off all the stuff that you grew or whatever, and you get nothing practically. You get protection from whatever marauders, bandits, with their vassals, which were just guards that they had. So that was the system all the way up to the 1860s. However, Alexander II ended it, and still now the Russian monarchy is still pretty popular, but there was starting to become some dissent growing inside the country, maybe because these people that after disappointed that they had to be in serfdom all that time, and then they entered an economy that wasn't very suited for the lower classes of Russia, and some of them became revolutionaries. And then in 1882, the very popular Tsar Alexander II was killed by an explosion. Well, there was bombs thrown at him, and after that, Alexander III took over, which he was going to do nothing. And really, at that time, nothing really happened from 1882 up to 1894 when Nicholas I came. And he would be the Tsar that Nicholas II would come. That was the Tsar that we know that ultimately the Russian monarchy would collapse under 23 years after his abdication. Or not abdication, coronation. Abdication is when the monarch leaves. In in 1894, Nicholas II comes into the monarchical title with a bang, and it was a very bad thing that happened. Right as soon as he became the head of state of Russia, there was a stampede at his coronation, and 1,200 people died, and that's where the title Bloody Nicholas, or the Bloody Tsar, started, because as soon as he became the Tsar, already 1,200 people died. Then later, he lost a lot of support when he got into a war that was unwinnable practically with the Japanese. Russia and Japan fought in 1905. And then this is at the beginning, really, the Japanese empire that would later become a major part. World War II built up, because at that same year they took Korea and got into a war with Russia, and they beat Russia in the war after many failures. And during the Japanese war with Russia, or what happened after the Japanese war with Russia, that was the first time, I think, that an Asian power had defeated a European power in war, or at least recently. It was a major feat by Japan to beat Russia in that war, I guess, because it was really not expected. And then it was the revolution in 1905 which failed, and was led by the same kind of people like Lenin and Trotsky, I think, were involved. And during the revolution in 1905, the Russian Guard opened fire on protesters, and 500 protesters were killed. So that further damaged the Russian Tsar's grip on the people of Russia. And also later, they did some reforms to try to regain support for the monarchy. They actually turned it into a constitutional monarchy. So they had a State Duma, which is like their parliament. The State Duma was formed. And then in 1914, World War I happens, and then we see what happens for the next few years is that ultimately we had Rasputin was actually put into kind of like a position of power, and Rasputin, that's how kind of desperate the monarchy became for almost losing powers, that they went to this illiterate mountain man to go for kind of like a psychic advice that they believed to be, or no, he was kind of like a psychic. He's more like a faith healer, I guess is what he was. And it was actually they went to him to try to heal their son that was sick and had hemophilia. The one disease where you control, or you can't control the bleeding when you bleed uncontrollably every time that you get cut or whatever. And then actually, apparently, it was somewhat successful because they kept going to him, and they kept going to him all the way till the point he was assassinated in 1916. And then after that, their luck really got bad because the war started to become very unpopular in Russia, and then really just the power of the monarchy just became very unpopular. And then, whether you think it was spontaneous or not, in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution happens in October 1917, and the Russian monarchy is forced to flee from power in St. Petersburg, which was the capital then, and the Russian monarchy is in prison later. And then, in 1918, they're killed, and it was brutal. I mean, they were taken down to a basement, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna take a picture of you, all you guys or whatever," and then they actually all opened fire on the Russian monarchical family. And then not only did they kill Tsar Nicholas II, they killed his wife, they killed all his children, and even the one that supposedly got away, well, she actually was killed there too. And that was the end of the Russian monarchy after that. The Romanovs, the cousins and all that, and all the distant family members, they all went to other countries and went to Finland, and some went to France, I think. Hey, Vince, I'm going to take a 2-minute break. I'll be back. Got to do something real quick. Vince, you there?
Yep, I'm here. I had to plug back in. All right, Chris.
Yeah, let's back up for 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, let me put my earpiece back on here. I've got my mic plugged. Okay, I'm all plugged up here, and so now I can hear you when you come back. All right, let me go back over here to UCY.TV chat and back up a little bit. There's John Teeter is here. I'm going to back up here in chat. He had posted some earlier. So he asked, John asked me, did I know Russia helped the North during the American Civil War? I said, yes, I do. It was, and I didn't spell his name right, but Seward's Folly it was called. They purchased Alaska, America did, for 16 cents an acre. I forget the total amount. That was to get around paying for the Russian Navy to come and I forget what harbor that was, but they blocked it off in defense of the North against the South, and I think maybe the French or something. And I don't recall the whole of that story, but Seward's Icebox, it was called, or Seward's Folly, at the purchase of Alaska. It turns out to probably be one of the best real estate investments ever made. So, and John said that he didn't know that till now. It's interesting how history repeats itself. According to John Teeter, Russia will help us in the Second American Civil War. You know, John, I've not really looked real close at the John Teeter information. I guess that's a neglect on my part. Further, he says resurgence of Christianity reminds me of. Whoops! I hit a button and it moved on me. And I don't know who this is. Alois, Alois. Hey.
Mac.
All right, Chris. Okay, so I was just talking about when Russia helped the North in the Civil War and purchased Alaska to pay the Russian, I guess for the Navy that they used to help blockade a harbor. Are you aware of that information? Maybe you could explain a little.
Yeah, that's Russia. It's kind of interesting because, like I said, the Tsar Alexander II abolished serfdom around the same time, which was their version of slavery. And at the same time as when the Civil War was going on here, and then the Russian monarchy actually was supportive of the Union during the war. You know, there was actually quite a bit of European, involvement when it came to who they supported. You know, I know the French, they supported the Confederacy. The British were kind of mixed, I think, but there were some people that were high up, I think, in Britain had some money that were giving money to the South. But I don't think the government of Britain wouldn't give a formal. The rumor is that the government of Britain wouldn't give a support of the Confederacy because of Uncle Tom's Cabin, that book, or because it exposed how bad slavery was, and a lot of people in Britain had read the book, and that apparently most British had became pretty aware of at least how bad they believed the South to be. So if the British government was to support the Confederacy, it would upset most of the British people. So they decided not to give any official support to them. The French, on the other hand, I don't think they were as concerned, and I think that the French, they didn't particularly. I think the French had a different view on the whole Civil War in general. And it's kind of I think that's a different show to talk about. When we talk about the American Civil War, because it's like ultimately on the same side you see on the same time you see like people like Lincoln were giving these statements that were just horribly racist, more racist than even the Southern commanders would say at times. And actually, you look at it, the whole history has been distorted on the Civil War when it comes to acting like the Union was in it about ending slavery. Let's forget about it. The Union didn't care about the ending slavery. It was about taxes. It was about they didn't want to lose territory. But slavery was just the excuse that they started 2 years after the war had happened to try to justify what they were doing to other Americans. It was highly unpopular, the Civil War, of course, because this was a war that Americans were killing each other, and the North ultimately kind of started it. The ultimate aggression when they came down to for the Battle of Fort Sumter, and the Union, the Confederacy had just succeeded peacefully. They didn't actually, do any battles. They just declared that they're sovereign. And then the Union decided, well, we're going to actually not going to allow that, and we're going to pretty much invade your newly formed country if you don't back away from the decision. And of course, there's horrible things going on in the South, like the slavery that was happening. But let's not forget that the Union had the fugitive slave law that they complied with, which in the North, if you found a runaway slave, you either could, well, actually, if you found a black person, is how it worked, you could either get $5 for clearly identifying the black man as a free man, and that got you $5, or, which was quite a bit of money then, or you got double the money if you found a runaway slave and turned him into law. So there was even people that were like free men that were like, oh, I found a runaway slave. They couldn't prove that they were a free man, so guess what? Now they weren't a free man anymore, and they were turned into slavery. So the North is very compliant to the horrible thing that was slavery. And I know, from what I understand, even some of the Confederate generals weren't pro-slavery themselves. In fact, I believe it was I think it was Robert Lee. Yeah, I think Robert Lee had clearly expressed that he believed slavery to be horribly immoral. While Lincoln, he didn't have much of a problem actually with slavery, or at least not with the mistreatment of black people. When you hear what he had to say about blacks, it was not very kind. And so the whole, and also let's not forget, at the same time, you had the Union was in the process of committing genocide against the Native American population of the United States. It still had been completely brought down to the numbers that they are now. And down in the South, actually, most of the Native Americans were on the Confederate side. Well, at least I think the majority of them were. In fact, there was a commander that was Native American, Sam, I think it was Waukee or something like that, and he was the last Confederate commander actually to surrender in the war. In June of 1865, he surrendered after even Robert Lee had surrendered. So the whole history of that, there's a lot of stuff Americans don't know about the Civil War. They just see it completely as bad guys, the South versus the good guys, America, the North. But it wasn't that simple. And yeah, the Russians, they, out of kind of an agreement they made, that they decided to support the North. And then later in 1867, they bought it for pennies. I mean, it was 2 cents an acre. They bought Alaska.
16 cents an acre. And that was the time that, during the time that Russia was battling for control of the peninsula with Japan, I think, and they were really short on funds. And so I assume...
It wasn't that. No, it was... That was later. It was 1905 you're thinking of. And yeah, they were fighting for Vladivostok and in the Far East Russia. They were fighting for when Japan and Russia were fighting against each other in 1905. But Russia sold all that land that they had in Alaska. I think it was partially because of they had gotten into a pretty ugly war in the 1850s in Ukraine. Actually, there was actually a war on the Crimea back then. So in a way, history does repeat itself because of war in almost the same place, and they lost a lot of money.
I second guessed myself. I was going to say the Crimean War to start with, so I guess I was right there and wrong when I said it. And I may be wrong about that 16 cents an acre. Now that you say 2 cents, it sounds familiar, but I thought it was 16 cents.
I think 2 cents is right because because I know with steel, 16 cents an acre would have been that much of a steal, because think about it, back then, 16 cents was actually quite a bit of money. I mean, it was like probably equivalent of times that by about 40.
Maybe they paid him 16. Maybe they paid him $16 million for it or something then at 2 cents an acre. Maybe that's how it went. I can't remember. It's been so long ago.
That would have been like $6 in today's money or something like that an acre, counting inflation, which, you have to remember a lot of that territory is completely useless. So I think they got it like, $6 an acre actually wouldn't have been that much of a steal for a lot of uninhabited, useless territory. And it wasn't like they hadn't known about the oil yet in Alaska. Yeah, later it wouldn't be so useless for the United States when they would get a ton of oil out of it in the 70s. And that would be, now it's practically sucked dry, all the oil that exists there in Alaska. But then it was just mainly about territory. Actually, the Russians went, during their time in the Russian Empire, they actually went all the way down to California, they had outposts going all the way down the West Coast, all the way down the Yukon, down British Columbia, down Washington, down Oregon, all the way down to North California. And so they had they had the entire, a lot of the North American West Coast was under Russian control, and they had all that territory that they had in Siberia and European Russia, and then the stuff that countries that are now different countries in Eastern Europe that were controlled during the Russian Empire. I mean, their empire went, I think, at one time from Warsaw all the way to Sacramento. I mean, just think about how powerful of a country that is. And then within 50 years, it was all gone. Well, the outposts, I think, were abandoned a little bit before that, but before this time, 1867. But yeah, they sold it Alaska in 1867, and within 50 years, the Russian Empire would collapse, and the Soviet Union would be formed 5 years after that. The Soviet Union was formed by regaining some of the Russian Empire land that they lost during the Bolshevik Revolution. A lot of the countries succeeded out of the Russian Empire, and some of them kind of came back. They had their own little revolutions or whatever, and they made their own socialist republics, and then they reformed kind of somewhat of a Russian Empire, and then it was the Soviet Union. And now it's a little bit different. The Russian Federation is smaller than both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, but the new Russia is kind of relies more on they have very strong allies in those countries, but they let them be sovereign. Like Kazakhstan is kind of a pretty strong ally, especially Belarus. They have trading blocks and stuff like that within their former republics and in countries that they have very strong alliances with now. They have Belarus is a very strong alliance country with Russia. They have Tajikistan, it's a non-made-up country that's actually a real country. You know, some of those Central Asian countries almost sound made up. They have decent relationships because Kyrgyzstan, that's another one that sounds pretty made up. I mean, you have Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and those were all former Soviet republics that I'm mentioning right there, and Turkmenistan. But you know, a few of those countries are not pro-Russian now. Turkmenistan is actually an interesting country because after it fell out of the Soviet Union in 1991, they made a president for life. I think it was I forget the guy's first name, Niyazov or whatever, who was like the most eccentric leader in a bad way I think for the most part. I mean, Niyazov was just a weird leader altogether, and he had like really weird laws, like men couldn't have long hair in his country, or he had a law that he banned, I think, dentures or something like that. He banned dentures because he believed that people should have kept their teeth in good shape. He believed it promoted irresponsible dental hygiene. I think that was his reasoning for the law or something like that. I mean, the guy had some. Oh yeah, he also named months of the year after him and his family. I think he even named like 1 month after his dog's name. And
I looked at that. You were right. It is 2 cents an acre, $7.2 million in March 30th of 1867. I think it was April 9th, 1867.
So actually, next year will be the 150th anniversary of the United States gaining Alaska as a territory, and then they would make a mistake quite a bit later. I mean, they almost waited 100 years to make a mistake. 92 years later, they made a mistake, and now Alaska has been for kind of a few years now that there's been some people that were wanted independence there and make their own country. There was actually a petition in 2014 that actually gained quite a bit of signatures. I think it was like almost 100,000. It almost reached 100,000 signatures of people that wanted after the Crimea thing that went down in 2014. There was people saying, "Well, how about Alaska? Can you annex us too, so we don't have to be controlled by Obama or Hillary or whoever is the next president?" And then they actually almost got the signatures required that would have taken. If that happened, the White House has to give a little response or whatever. They could just say no, and that would be their official response. But they almost got the 100,000, and they got like in just a few days the signatures. Alaska could almost. They have a pretty big economy. I think but they only have 600,000 people, so I don't know how them being independent would work. There's all these little, in America, there's all these people that talk shit and say, "Oh, we're going to secede" or whatever. But I wish somebody would actually do it. Would give me an option somewhere to move to, but they're not going to do it because it's probably not feasible. Because I think if a country actually seceded from the United States would like start an all-out war against that newly formed country, like what happened during the Confederacy splitting away. But I think it would be even worse now because of the just strengths that the United States military has today. It'd be literally impossible for a state to secede away. There would have to be a total revolution. The only way that states could start seceding away, not even like Texas or something like that might have a lot of armed supporters for it, would be able to succeed away. But how most Texans think politically, I think it would just be a country very similar to the United States is today, just technically different. It'd be like the difference between the United States and Canada. It wouldn't be much of a difference. Just be some different cultural norms or whatever. There's all this talk about Vermont succeeding or whatever. I actually saw some people online talk about, hey, how about if Bernie Sanders loses, we succeed, Vermont succeeds from the Union, and Bernie Sanders gets the presidency of Vermont. But the funniest thing about that is that the Vermont Mountain Boys, I don't think, are very kind of Bernie Sanders or an establishment politician like that. They're more wild and more like they're more like rednecks, like you'd see down south or something like that. They're not very fond of people like Bernie Sanders, which it's just a complete show. I think that this election it's turned into a total reality show, and if people that are on my Facebook, they saw that post I put up about is that people are focusing not even on the how Trump totally just got on all fours for Israel at AIPAC the other day, or the fact that Trump even said that he'd bomb Iran as long as Saudi Arabia pays for it, showing not much of a difference from the current foreign policy. No, rather when they criticize Trump, they're more worried about his wife and what Melania Trump does. Which, Melania Trump, she took some naked pics of herself or whatever, which I don't know what that personal life or what that specifically has anything to do with anything about the presidency. Melania Trump's naked pics, which the only thing that made me feel compelled to do is actually look it up. Check those out. As Trump said, they would probably be totally classy. I saw them like blurred out or whatever on YouTube, or not YouTube, I mean Facebook, and I was thinking, it's like, wait a minute, it's like, in her defense, those look pretty classy actually. Like there wasn't anything like, she just didn't have any clothes on, compared to what some celebrities have leaked over the years, compared to what Kim Kardashian and all those, people that are famous for nothing have done, or what Paris Hilton did over the years. That's nothing. It's ridiculous. And she was a model, and that was her job. Not like they just did it for fun. It was a Saturday evening. It just felt like releasing naked pictures of themselves from their phone to everybody. I don't know. It's turned into a total reality show. It's a complete circus, and all these candidates are clowns. I'm gotta have put in 2016. We're gonna find a way. We're gonna do like a baseball trade style deal with Russia. We'll send them some. Well, you know what? We'll send them all politicians. They can lock them up in a work camp over there in Siberia. They can replace their president with Medvedev. I mean, Medvedev isn't that bad. He's pretty much was Obama, Putin's sidekick. Obama, can spend the rest of his days over there in a Siberian work camp. We get Putin as president. Also, all our politicians have been cleaned up, so we can actually put in some guys that would actually represent us. We could put in Gary Johnson, or we could people like Jesse Ventura or whatever. We could totally shake things up, and Putin immediately kicks out the Rothschilds of America. They've already been kicked out of Russia, so Russia, there's nothing bad for them. In fact, they could do something cool with all the U.S. politicians before. They could put them in a zoo or something. Have that could be an exhibit. U.S. politicians will be right next to the apes, and then the apes can fling shit at them, and then you can see them hopelessly try to fight back. Then when they do try to fight back against the apes, they get mauled by them. I don't know, just some suggestions. And people think, well, they don't deserve that. Well, if you saw the 1.8 million dead Iraqis after the Iraq War, which they supported, or all the victims of ISIS that the United States government brought about, and what's happened in Syria, ever since they started that Syrian war. It was this constructive war where they funded these mercenaries to do terror in Russia or in Syria. Yeah, you'd be thinking that they deserved it. The United States government, it's like I think I forget who was the guy. It was the former CIA director, I think, said that or somebody high up in the CIA, I think it was the former CIA director, said that no matter how conspiracy minded you are or how paranoid of the government you are, what the government is actually doing is worse than what you can imagine. It's like I don't believe it was the CIA director that said that. I don't know. I think it was the CIA director. It's only and for him to come out of those words to come out of his mouth are just absolutely chilling. I think it was the one from the 80s. That was when the Operation Mockingbird and a few other stuff. Control the media, making sure the media is completely pro-Israel, and a few other things happened. MK Ultra. Some of the CIA's most important, some of their more darker programs came about in the 1980s, and now I'm actually going to look that up. I'll look that up sometime later. I'm not 100% certain on if that was the director of the CIA that said that, but there's a few other quotes you could see about some of the stuff that the CIA had done, and now all the stuff you could see declassified, all these documents, stuff that happened during the Cold War, stuff that happened during Operation Condor, which is to support fascist governments all throughout South America, which led to the deaths of 1 million people, more than 1 million people in South America, many more imprisoned, and just immense poverty that those people had to live through because of these governments that had taken over South America for all those years during Operation Condor, which during that time leaders like Stroessner, Andrés Perez in Venezuela, and Pinochet, the Brazilian fascist leaders, I can't think of that person's name, the Argentine military junta that was in charge, and a few other really messed up governments existed at the time. I saw this week, I think, somebody, pretty cool died, unfortunately. He was 66 years old, an English footballer who was in the he was going to be in the 78 World Cup, for the play for England. However, during the World Cup, he decided, because it was Argentina was hosting the 78 World Cup, and he said that I'm not going to go to this World Cup. I mean, how could I go to a World Cup when I know that we'll be within 1,000 meters of a torture center? And he decided not to go, which he costed a lot of people say that he costed the World Cup for England because ultimately Argentina won that. It was Diego Maradona dominated throughout the World Cup. But what ultimately happened, it did make a lot of attention was drawn around the world about the Argentinian military junta that not many people were even aware was in charge of Argentina at that time. And then by the 80s, everybody knew that the Argentine that these horrible atrocities were happening in Argentina, not just Chile. It was happening in Argentina. It was a continent-wide thing that was going on in Venezuela. It was happening in Brazil. It was happening in Paraguay. And it happened in Paraguay. It was the same guy for 35 years. Alfredo Stroessner was in power that long. It was happening in Bolivia. It was happening, I think, even in Ecuador. It was happening in Colombia. It was happening in Panama. It was happening in Nicaragua. It was happening in Guatemala. I mean, most Latin American countries were suffering from the effects of Operation Condor. And I see in the alternative media it's covered, but I almost think it's not covered enough because it was a complete attack on Latin America for 30 years. And now I see sometimes in the alternative media, people are supporting, just all throughout. I'm talking about just all throughout Facebook and stuff like that. People are supporting the same leaders in the opposition. They think that this is some kind of revolution that's happening. This is a legitimate revolution, not just a constructed that's happening in Venezuela. They support the Venezuelan opposition, which are the same guys from the Andrés Perez government before. And they they put these out of context pictures and say, oh, this is what happens after 18 years of socialism or whatever. which they show one dusty street down in Venezuela, and they assume that's the entire country, and they forget that sanctions and other things come into major play, or economic warfare. Economic warfare is a very real thing, and it's a very commonly used thing by the United States government and other Western governments that they use against third world countries when they start to split away from their sphere of influence, that they just go after the economy, crush it, and then they make the problem, then they create the solution. You join us and we'll fix your economy, or bring somewhat law and order back to your country. Then and then the new problem arises that they're now stuck under a new fascist dictator that they just put into power. Like what would happen in Venezuela if they were to go the right way. But that's, the Venezuelan people have caught on, and that's why every time, now there's been, three major attempts, two coup attempts, and then there was that thing that was going on earlier this year where, they've been trying. Well, I think it's kind of in process right now that the parliament's been trying to oust Maduro without really going. It's a completely illegal procedure because they didn't even win those extra National Assembly seats that actually enable them to have that power. And now they're trying to do that decision. Most of the people don't want it, and every time they actually try to start a thing, they actually, we're going to start a protest. It's going to this small rally is going to lead to the revolution. 300 people show up, 10,000 in the counter rally in support of Maduro and the Chavistas. It's an absolute joke, the Venezuelan opposition. It's not successful, so that's good. It's not like they're actually succeeding in going against the will of the Venezuelan people, which is what people do not want the Andres Perez legacy to come back. And the times of the 90s and the suffering and the people in poverty and people living in slums, the military police killing protesters. We forget those times, then Venezuela might be in trouble. And that's the problem, is that it has been so many years. It's been almost 20 years since that happened. And now we, 20 years later, a lot of people that survived that are now older. A lot of those people have also died. Some of the, older people that were around at that time that were 50, 60 years old, a lot of them have died now, and there's a big portion of the people that are 30 and under that don't remember that stuff. If you're 30 years old, you're not going to remember the Carazaco. You were 3 years old when it happened in 1989. Even if you're 40 years old, you're only 13 when it happened. You're not going to, you might not have really felt the pain as much because you weren't actually paying the bills, and you weren't actually looking for work and having it and trying to get food when that happened. That was what led to the protest. Really, was the food prices that went through the roof, and nobody could even afford to pay for anything. And Venezuela, all the stuff that's happened now is that, talk about the shortages of food that are happening or whatever. Well, number one, like I said again, sanctions. Number two is that there are a lot of their stores, and these are old pictures to see, is that before they had a very massive problem with looting. That was practically looting. People, foreigners coming from Colombia, going in there, bring a truck, they buy a truckload of food or whatever at the super low prices. Let's just say, for example, I don't know, I'll just throw something together here. I do every now and then put a little tidbit of information. Let's say that chicken fingers or whatever. We'll just say that a bag of chicken fingers in Colombia, that's probably $6 or something like that. Because that's food's pretty expensive over there. It's almost like American price. But in Venezuela, it's subsidized, and you're actually only going to pay 80 cents in Venezuela. So you buy a whole truckload of chicken fingers. We'll just say they can fit a 1,000 in your truck, bags of chicken fingers. So you buy that at $800. You go to Colombia, you sell it at $6,000. And just remember that this is all done, the amount of labor you made, let's say at tops you did 4 hours of labor, and what you made was $5,200 over 4 hours. You were literally have just been paid $1,300 an hour to do your little scam, and then some people might have done that They went to different stores and stuff. They might have done that 10 times over just a week. They could have done that. And in a week, they made $52,000. They did 10 trips. I'm sure there was at least a few people that had done stuff like that. And they tightened down, and they caught some of these guys. You know, smuggling literally just a whole truckload of milk back to Colombia and stuff like that. Because in Colombia, they have American food prices, and they can take advantage of that the Colombian people will pay almost American prices. While in Venezuela, they can buy that stuff at subsidized prices. So now they have an ID system or whatever. So if you could go, but that's only the Venezuelan. You know, it's like if you could still go to whatever their version of Kroger or whatever, and go in there and just buy all the food you want without any ID. But if you want the cheaper prices at the government subsidized prices, which is supposed to be for poor people, mainly that can't really afford the prices that are at the Kroger, then you have to show your ID. I mean, big deal. There is no bioscanning. There's nothing like that. No, it's just like pretty much a driver's license that has, that for food, pretty much. It's not great that it came down to that, but when you have massive problems like people taking and literally just buying up all your shit and they're not even from your country, and they're defeating the whole purpose of having the subsidized food for the people that used to just starve, or they used to have to get into crime and just break into stores and stuff like that. Or I mean, I would say go to jail and get fed that way, but actually in South America that usually doesn't mean that, because you almost have to fend for yourselves in prisons in South America. If anyone's Mel Gibson movie like that about I forget what's the name of it, but he's pretty much the gringo down in a Mexican prison. And there's people with guns, knives, and stuff like that in Mexico. There's no really limit. They don't really check for weapons. The guards don't really care if you get killed, and they'll just throw like a pot of food and 10 people have to fight over it, and of course there's gonna be people that are not gonna eat. So especially back then, I can imagine they probably have reformed it a little bit and made it a little bit more humanitarian. I mean, that's what I saw is that during the I saw what Leopoldo Lopez was sent to or whatever. It didn't seem too bad. It looked like one of our prisons maybe or whatever, which is of course our prisons are not the best, but it's definitely a lot better than like a Colombian prison or whatever that is notoriously horrible. But then there's one that has like a really horrible, it's got like a horrible ring to it, because everybody knows it as the, it's like this is where the worst people in Colombia, like drug dealers and stuff like that, terrorists and all kind of FARC. I guess they're all dumped into this prison, and you have to imagine having to fend for yourself in that prison. Most people won't survive. We got about 30 plus minutes left of the show. If anybody wants to call on 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. The lines have been open the entire show. I was kind of waiting on a caller there, but I don't know if he's going to show up. We only got 30 minutes left of the show. For talk about Russia, Russia left Syria about a week ago, and I think they definitely left at a good time, and I think they're going to reassess the situation while the Syrians try to make some kind of peace deal or whatever, which I don't think is going to last, this truce. I think that ultimately it's going to fall apart. But it's not even really been a truce. There's been a lot of violations of the truce during the truce, but it's at least it's a de jure time of peace inside of Syria, while the rebels and the government are going to come to some kind of agreement. I guess if the Russians are probably going to have to deem returning to Syria if necessary, and when Putin decides that, he'll bring the soldiers back into Syria. But for now, Russia has left Syria, which is like the opposite of what the U.S. military would do and just stay for the next 30 years or forever, like what's happened in after World War II, where the United States kept bases in Germany ever since. I still haven't looked up about I believe that quote I said earlier. I mean, you can go look it up for yourself and you can find out who actually said it. But it was killing me because I couldn't think of actually who said it. But it was like, again, it's like one of the most striking quotes that you can see.
Give us
Yeah,
that
well-
quote again, and I'll go look it up, Chris.
Yeah, I was saying, so I was I didn't want to leave the Skype app because when I've done that before, it just disconnects me from the show. Which I'm sorry about the audio problems. I know that there are a lot of people are telling me about the audio, and I was told that it might have been the bandwidth problems that I have with my router. I guess May this week. I can't give any promises, but I could say that May this week or next week or the week after that. I'll tell you in the next 3 weeks, the router. I'll get a new router, and we'll be able to give a better sounding audio quality on the show. And May I'll actually put down some money also for a mic, also like a cheap mic, instead of talking into the tablet mic, and you can actually give it. I definitely like that more crisp FM sounding radio compared to what sounds to be just a random dude on a podcast. Because I've had some pretty good shows, but people, they kind of downvote it because ultimately I had very bad audio on the show.
It's better tonight, Chris. Hey, give me that quote, though. Let me go look that up for you, and so I can bring it back over to chat.
Yeah, the quote is no matter how conspiracy-minded you are or paranoid of the government, you are the government will be doing things worse than you can even imagine. Not exactly the exact words, but that's pretty much it. I'm sure if you type it up, it will come up. Yeah, Russia leaving Syria was actually very unexpected. A lot of people were pretty surprised by it. So, a lot of people, the United States media was automatically saying, oh, this is probably some part of some darker intentions by Russia. Oh, they're probably planning on, they're saying all kinds of stuff. They're probably planning on coming back with 100,000 soldiers or whatever. I don't know.
William Blum.
But what was he? Was he a former director or what?
I hate hitting these Wikipedia for anything, but I'll go ahead and take that just for the information provided of who he is. Born in 1933, an American author and critic of the United States foreign policy. A former State Department employee, left the organization in 1967 due to his opposition of the Vietnam War. Let's see, I don't see.
Yeah, he was a State Department employee, so I got it a little bit mixed up. But yeah, he definitely was in a U.S. Foreign Policy Department of the U.S. government, and he definitely saw the post-JFK intelligence of the United States, which right there, I mean, really got really bad after 1967 was also the year the USS Liberty happened. So I can imagine that there probably were some people that might have been on board up to that point, or were on board until I bet the JFK assassination. A lot of people after that must have left after they saw the horrid cover-up that happened, and what happened to all those witnesses. There were like 100 people that died suspiciously after the JFK assassination. People that saw it firsthand. They didn't want those guys around to give any kind of testimony that would counter to the official story. The JFK assassination, I can't even think of anything comparable like that happened over in Russia. I may think of an example, but there isn't really any. The cover up of that. I guess in a way, Alexander II is kind of similar the way represented because like the old they say democracy died with JFK at Dealey Plaza. And Alexander II, well, his country, the Tsar of, the Tsardom of Russia, kind of started that was pretty much signaled a major turning point because within 30 years of that, or 35 years of that, the Russian Empire collapsed, and Alexander II was kind of like the last popular, strong Tsar. Because Nicholas II was a strong Tsar, but he wasn't as popular. A lot of people, saw him as a butcher and saw him as ultimately a the dictator, which all of them were really dictators. I mean, they couldn't vote him out, but they saw him as the same light as a authoritarian dictator, not a benevolent one. I guess what would be their reasoning why they wouldn't why they would like other ones and not Nicholas II. Nicholas II. he was responsible for Bloody Sunday in 1905, which is when he opened fire on the protesters. He was responsible for kind of unnecessary involvement, really, for Russia entering into the World War I. There wasn't no really need to be in that war, because it really was about at first it was really Austro-Hungary versus Serbia, and then it became more about British versus Germany, as they both jumped in almost immediately. But I know Serbia was a pretty close ally of Russia, and that's why they entered. Serbia has always been, a pretty close ally of Russia. They're a close ally of Russia now. Today, not really a close ally. They're an ally of Russia now. Serbia kind of goes back and forth. In fact, they were debating for a long time whether or not to join the European Union, because they were kind of sitting on the fence, but now they look like they've decided to join more of the BRICS bloc rather than go into that collapsing deck of cards. I don't even see why anybody would want to join the EU right now, unless, you're a leader that wants to see your country collapse before your eyes. They had in Serbia just 10 years before the debate even happened. There was the EU and NATO responsible for the horrid crimes that happened to Yugoslavia and Serbia and the Albania. Albania was actually part of the NATO crimes that was being committed. I mean, ultimately, NATO favored Albania definitely and bombed in favor of them. That's why Albania they didn't really committed a act of being a traitor towards Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia and Albania never even really liked each other, even during the times when they were socialist republics. Albania and Yugoslavia didn't like each other because Albania, for most of the years, Albania was pro-Mao. Yugoslavia didn't like Mao or the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia had a whole different way of governing things. And Albania just, hated on Yugoslavia all those years. So Yugoslavia kind of just ignored them for the most part. For anybody that was rational, Hoxha, the leader of Albania, was just kind of really just seemed like a nut job. He actually forced almost all the Albanian people pretty much to get ready for War III. He forced everyone to build bunkers, and he actually interrogated or killed 30% of his population. It was mass harassment by secret police. So Tito knew that pretty much his action alone spoke for themselves, that he doesn't really need to convince anybody educated that Albania didn't have any sense to their words. But Albania and Bosnia was who NATO bombed in favor of during the 1990 or 1999 bombings. And that's one thing that when people say that Bill Clinton was involved in any horrid war crimes, just remember about Serbia, Bosnia, and what happened to all of the former Yugoslavia. Well, at that time, Yugoslavia still existed, because it was the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And I saw that some kangaroo court convicted one of the people who was high up in the Serbian government. And remember the guy Slobodan? Remember he died in the Hague prison about 10 years ago. Now another top Serbian leader, and he had absolutely no, he had no way to defend himself. So they just, they convicted him, and now he's been sentenced to death, I believe. Which, if you're gonna go after somebody that was from that time frame that's doing war crimes, why don't they go after the neocons? Why don't they go after Netanyahu? But of course, NATO and the ICC and all that, are pretty unfair. The last time they really gave justice to anybody that really deserved it, we're talking about these international courts, is Nuremberg, and most of them people got away. They didn't even convict them. They pretty much let them go. Only 16 of them got convicted of the former Nazis. A lot of them killed themselves before. A lot of them got away and just joined the United States government and became some of the building blocks for the government of the United States for all the way up to now. Going back to Russia and Syria, is that Russia also during the time in Syria, they had overwhelming support from the people on the ground in Syria, they were so efficient. They did many did many airstrikes in all within a matter of a few months. They did tens of thousands of airstrikes within a few months, and it wasn't very few civilian casualties reported. That were accidental, and unlike what the United States government would do, which would they don't even. A lot of times it's not only that they don't care, it's that they will do it intentionally as part of the objective, target civilian hospitals and stuff like that. There was a rumor sometime during the Russian effort in Syria that Russia had done the same thing and had hit a hospital or whatever. I think that was just pure. There wasn't really much substance to it. I think it sounded like, unfortunately, it was an accident or whatever. So there was actually a very strong terrorist presence in the region, and they were doing one of the most common tactic inside of Syria is that the Syrian rebels and the Syrian terrorists have used human shields a lot of times. And what I mean by that is that they enter neighborhoods intentionally, and then when they're being struck at, it forces the enemy, or their enemy, Russia or Syria, Iran or whatever, to have to target those areas, which ultimately ends up in a lot of times accidental deaths. Unfortunately, that's the reality of war. But it's when you've seen the United States before. When they struck like the one hospital in Afghanistan, I think that kind of stuff's intentional. It's part of the war effort by the United States, to completely terrorize the population so they submit. And Syria, the Russian military could have stayed. They didn't stay. They left as soon as it became appropriate to leave, which was during the time of the ceasefire. A lot of people believe that they shouldn't even have left because it pretty much is letting ISIS just restage for later offensive strikes. But I don't think that they're going to be coming back, especially with the fact that Iran and Syria is still there to protect Syria. And Iran has over 15,000 troops inside Syria. And the Syrian military is a much larger military than some would think. Ultimately, though, this whole Syrian war became a travesty, with around 500,000 people dead because of the war, many civilians. We have a lot of people who had to flee the country. Minorities were targeted and killed. The Kurdish, the Christians were killed. But we've also seen some pretty inspiring stuff during the Syrian civil war. We've seen Palestinians rise up and support their anti-Zionist brothers in Syria and fight against the Zionist-supported rebels in Syria. And then you had the Palestinian group that was the Palestinian Front for Liberation General Command, who was fighting inside of Syria in favor of Assad. We've had at the same time, we've seen solidarity between Iran and Syria as Iran became a major part in pushing ISIS out of Syria. Which Iran, they've just completely kicked ass in some places. Some of their generals have been very directly responsible for some major victories inside of Syria. Iran being very responsible for these major victories inside of Syria. It shows that their friendship came into use. Definitely, Iran and Syria have actually a treaty that one of them struck, that they'll help each other out. So if Iran was to be struck one day, Syria would help them out. And while Syria had been struck, they'd been struck by terrorism inflicted by foreign countries, and Iran came in to help. And in the long run, it looks like they're on the way to victory unless the United States military interferes in Syria's in the Syrian operation against ISIS, and then they actually end up salvaging their terrorist assets, the ones that they funded for before, and that could very much happen, considering that the United States spends you look at the numbers, they spend like $500 billion training the rebels alone. So when they spend these ridiculous amounts of money just to do one action or whatever, they probably spend trillions of dollars on these Syrian rebels. and the Syrian effort to try to take out Assad, to try to bring him back to the Rothschild banks, they're not going to give up very easily. And you see stuff like what happened with Libya. Remember, they bombed them one time, and then when the Libyan government didn't fall in '86, they came back 25 years later with a vengeance and bombed the shit out of Libya, and then they turned them over to, well, now they're turned over to really nobody. And there's nobody really controls Libya. I guess ultimately just it's a lot of clans and stuff like that. It's complete lawlessness, I guess. It's hell right now. That's what Libya is. The United States supports a lot of these terrorists that run around inside of, including ISIS, that is taken. They're probably the most powerful entity inside of Libya right now. And they were about to get to that point in Syria, but no longer that way now. But in Libya, that's definitely the case. And they're in the middle of a civil war. That unrest never ended. It kind of came to a calm for a little bit, and there was just some minor violence for like 3 years. And then in 2014, a new civil war started. And now we're in the middle of a new civil war that's lasted 2 years. So this civil war that's going on now is longer than the first civil war. And Libya is just an absolute humanitarian disaster, 100%. Most media, even the Western media, if confronted about it, would say that's the case. There's no way of defending it. There's no way you can say that Libya, the country with the highest human development index prior to Gaddafi's removal from power, now overran by terrorists, it definitely hasn't improved there. It's definitely went down in their standard of life. And for the most Libyan people, it definitely wouldn't be supportive when they look back of the actions that the United States military did. And he was heavily popular still, even though he had been in power so long. Gaddafi was still loved by the people. And ultimately, Gaddafi didn't make a lot of decisions. It was by the elected People's Council under him. I mean, it wasn't like Gaddafi didn't have any power, but it wasn't like Gaddafi had the ultimate say in every decision. And like it's shown that he was just an absolute rule for Gaddafi and 100% dictatorship. It wasn't exactly like that. In Libya, also, there were so many services provided inside of Green Libya for people via the nationalization of oil. They were able, or in other, not just services, but just the things, standards of living were so good in that country. They were able to have, for example, you could get like 50 loaves of bread at 15 cents in Libya, ridiculous stuff like that. You could get oil at 15 cents a gallon. You could, higher education was free. Healthcare was free. And not only was higher education free, if you graduated and couldn't find a job in your profession, they'd give you your salary that you would have normally gotten for that profession until you found a job. If you had a medical procedure that couldn't be done inside of your country, inside of Libya, they would actually pay for your airfare and actually for the procedure to be done in whatever other country at the expense of them. If you were getting married, they gave you stuff like $50,000. If you're getting married and having kids, if you wanted to start a farm, they gave you $50,000 and the basic equipment needed to start a farm. They were able also to, Gaddafi, the success he was able to do, was to be able to bring water to places that they never had even had water before, reliable amounts of water, with his man-made irrigation project, making much more fertile land for farming and much more available water for poor citizens, out in the remote areas of Libya. And Russia, where do they come into play in all this is that, and Russia, I think they didn't do enough really to try to prevent what happened in Libya, and that's why they're doing what they're doing now in Syria, is that they're really making sure that Syria does not fall to the same fate as Libya, and that's Putin's talked a lot about. He did warn, of what would happen to the West. He said that nothing good would come out of taking out Gaddafi's deposal from power, and that they're just going to end up like it did now. Now it's almost been 5 years later, and Putin came out 100% right, but he didn't do anything militarily. like he did in Syria. I guess out of fear of what that would lead to. But Gaddafi was a strong ally of Russia as well. Gaddafi was also a pretty strong ally of the anti-Zionist leaders of Assad and Ahmadinejad. Has strong solidarity with his Pan-Africanist brother, Robert Mugabe, who was a strong supporter of African sovereignty from not only the United States, but just also European imperialism together. Gaddafi was strongly allied with Hugo Chavez, and the similar struggles that they had in Venezuela, and the kind of successes that they had in Venezuela of bringing a country that was one of the poorest in its region to one of the most successful in its region, and one of the countries that had one of the most highest standard of living in its region. Africa became the highest standard. Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa. In Venezuela, they had the highest standard of living in. What the stat they had there was the second highest poverty reduction inside of South America or in the region. So I think that might count all of Latin America as what they were talking about was that stat for the region. By the way, if anybody wants to give a last-minute call-in, 718-717-8296, 717-8296. Starting to get the Thor vocal cords almost as the.
Well, let me spell you just for a second and give a shout-out to UCY.TV. Coming up next is Live Free FM with Nathan Frazier for the next 2 hours. Stick around. Thanks for all the chatters. And over at Real Liberty Media, thanks for your input over there also, listening from the redirect over here to UCY.TV. And thanks, Jules, for all your hard work. Jules has added some new shows. I invite you, if you're listening downstream or live right now, go to UCY.TV. Check out the new show lineups there. So I check the schedule also. There's the homepage, schedule, shows, UCY archives, headline news. I know Miguel has clicked in on that site right there. Great news feeds, headline videos, and UCY.TV chat. Also check out the Earth and Sky, and remember, support UCY. Liking is loving and sharing is caring. And if you are ordering anything through Amazon, click on the support UCY.TV link right there. Shop through that link right there, and it'll throw a few pennies back for operational costs. Jules carries all the load herself here. She pays for this, and every once in a while somebody else send in a donation. So we really appreciate all the help, and I really appreciate being a part over here. More so, I guess UCY is a part of me.
I got an idea, Vince. Actually, is that I was thinking is that maybe I could get some. I guess I try to do something down the road. Maybe I could make some personalized Voice of Rebellion T-shirts or something like that. I may just make a batch or whatever. I'd wear one, just have an advertisement on my show when I'm walking around town or whatever. And then some other people can buy some, and I'll give some of the proceeds to UCY. I don't know. I see one possible way I could do that because I know somebody. Well, I know a place where I can get some shirt screens done pretty cheaply, or one shirt screen done, and then I can just bring in some Blake T-shirts, and then I just use the same screen or whatever. Once I have it made, no promises on that, but I'm definitely considering I'll get a UCY T-shirt or something. I didn't even know we had a clothing line or whatever. Yeah, we have our fancy clothing line. We'll soon have a UCY suits. No, I don't know, but we have our UCY T-shirts or whatever. And yeah, everybody that wants to buy one of those, check one out. I just saw that we had those recently, and definitely let all my friends know or whatever. They're actually look a little bit zazzy, I guess.
I just posted a picture of my T-shirt. My brother had a couple made for me with my name on it on the front, UCY.TV, and What Matters Worldwide. So yeah, I support that proudly. I also have a couple of shirts Nathan Frazier sent me, Live Free FM, and buttons. I've got 2 left pinned up here on my montage. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you, in support of UCY.TV, if you'll inbox me, I'll send you one of my Live Free FM buttons that I have left. We sent one out to, I know, who did I send them to? I think I sent it to Joe, and I sent one. Oh, it never arrived. I believe it got lost in the mail. But anyways, hey, and there's our good friend Jose, Sir Handsome. Join us in chat. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We got about 5 minutes left, or 4 actually. So I'm gonna hush up and hand you back the mic and let you close us out here, Chris. Thanks for all the good work. You're incredible. You're incredible with your history knowledge, and it's been so long since I looked at so many things. I did confuse some information earlier, so thanks for the corrections, and thanks for the participate. If I can say participation from the chatters there, John.
I know, got to that point of the show. I know I was starting to feel that. I was like, it's like I have to almost like time out some of the words I'm saying because it feels like they're like slipping off my tongue a little bit weird after talking for a while, and I've been, feel a little tired. Kind of had a long weekend. Yesterday I was up from 7 to almost 2 in the morning, and I did a lot of stuff yesterday. That's I felt like I don't think I quite recovered from yesterday. And today I kind of felt a little bit hungover, I guess, even though I'm not in drink or anything like that. But just it's like when you do so much the day before, and then you go to rest, and then the next day you just feel but yeah. I also thanks everybody that listened. We're on a few different platforms now. Voice of Rebellion Radio, of course, our home station, UCY Radio. We got Real Liberty Media. We have also now Freedom News. We're also there. That's our new platform, and we've got a few other new places where our website is at. Our show is at on different websites throughout the internet.
Freedom's Network.
Everywhere.
Freedom's Network. It's a new social site since World Truth closed down. Freedom's Network, it's the sister site, social media site for reallibertymedia.com.
Yes, sorry about that, all the people that are listening out there at Freedom's Network, but yeah, Freedom's Network, welcome to the Voice of Rebellion family. You're going to really like being here, and check out some of the old shows. You can go on YouTube, look up Voice of Rebellion Radio. Automatically, my shows pop up, and some idiot that made some video supposedly exposing me or whatever, when he just makes himself look like an idiot during that show, and he has like a few hundred views on that video or whatever. I'm pretty sure the guy was like an InfoWars plant or something. So you'll see that with all my great shows that I've done. I want to put some dates on my Facebook. People that actually are on my Facebook or subscribe to my Facebook, and that's what I'm telling you is that. Definitely you got to do that because I put a lot of information about the shows. I put a lot of information. I do live broadcasts on Facebook throughout the week, and on there as well. I have put up a lot of good info throughout the day. I put news. I put old info about other historical events and stuff like that. I mean, I put a lot of stuff on Facebook, and I put a lot of time and effort into it. So you got to subscribe to my Facebook, Chris Jackson Rojas. If you do that. Just subscribe. Don't send me a friend request because I'm not taking any more. The problem is that I already have enough people in my. I already get just this giant news feed. So many people are putting up stuff, and I miss a lot of people. A lot of people I really want to see their stuff. Close friends and stuff like that. That I'm trying to keep up with, and I miss what they're saying. So, subscribe only. Check out about Russia. I want people look up. Look up a few names of it'll be pretty some crazy stuff about the Bolshevik Revolution or whatever. Look up Trotsky, look up where he was from. Look up Stalin, where he was from. Where these people went. Definitely look up what happened during the 90s.
Point and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad that commented, kill the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. perfectly. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now